Let's look at the grid spacing system of Bootstrap. Remember, we have two equal columns with an image in each column, and then we scale them and they scale proportionally. Now remember, the Bootstrap framework uses 12 different spaces for the amount of things you can have in columns. So if you go across from left to right, there's 12 areas or 12 different grid definitions of columns going up and down. Right now it's a 6 and 6 because remember, Bootstrap works in a total of 12 column spacing. So if we don't put any code in to say how big the left column or the right column should be, they're going to equally space at 6 and 6 because that adds up to 12. Let's get the padding out of there before we go any farther. Padding was nice to show, but we're going to start having some different type of information come in, and we don't need to zero out the padding. We do want some spacing between the two images. Save that. Now we have our padding back when we scale. So let's just play with this idea of 12 across. This is 6 and this is 6. Let's make this one 4. And if we used 4 on the left column, that means we'd have 12 minus 4. That means we'd have 8 for the right column. You don't have to do both columns, but if you define the left one, the right one will use what's left over. So let's define the left column that has a width of 4 spaces on the grid. So we'll come in here on our column, our first column, which is our left one. And right after that, we'll use the Bootstrap framework designation of -8 to say, no, it was going to be -4. -4, use 4 of the column spacings, which means it'll leave 8 spacings left over for the column on the right. Save that and refresh. So we're using 4 of the grid spacings for the left column, and that leaves us 8 for the right column. And it scales proportionally. Let's change that around and let's use, let's say, 10 columns for the left, which would leave us 2 columns to the right in our grid spacing. So we'll just change that on the left one from a 4 to a 10. Save that. Refresh. So now we're using 10 of the grid spaces for the left column, and the leftover is 2 because we're always adding up to 12 with Bootstrap in the grid for the columns. It's a 10 and a 2. And so finally, let's go ahead and settle on making the left one 8, which will leave the right column to be 4. So we'll just come back in here to our first column. Let's make that 8, which will leave the one on the right to be 4. Refresh and scale it. And that's how you can use columns to space things out across the page. We could have more than 2 things, but we'd need more than 2 columns to do that. Just remember, in Bootstrap, the grid is 12 units wide that you can distribute between whichever amount of columns that you want to have. Remember, we defined the first column, the left one, and the right one just gets the leftover. So this is an 8 defined, and this is a 4 leftover in the grid framework of Bootstrap.